Hello, hello, welcome to Wellness Talks. I'm your host, Samana Jetty. We are live on LinkedIn and on YouTube. And this is my monthly show where I bring in a super awesome person so we can chat with them, learn about their passion in workplace wellness space. I've had guests like Jennifer Moss. That's when the whole show started. Andy Storch was one of them. So I'm really happy. Today's show is going to be super exciting as per usual. We are going to bring up an amazing person. I'm going to introduce him in just a second, but I want to know who's watching live. Where are you watching me live from? This show is being live streamed to LinkedIn and to YouTube. So you have an opportunity. I think it's also on Twitter. So you can also watch me on Twitter if you want. So there's a lot of options to interact. So what I'm going to do with you before I even start the presentation and bringing Dr. McKenney up on stage is just to tell you a little bit about me and the focus of this Workplace Wellness Talks. Now, Workplace Wellness Talks has been going on for about a year. I used to do a live show on Instagram way back when, and now I've moved over to LinkedIn because this is where the audience is, and I just want to get to know you more. So in the chat box here, tell me where you're joining me from, give me a little hey, use those emojis to interact with us. You're going to have tons of opportunities to ask questions, very interactive. If you've been on my show before, this is the type of show where you get to ask a ton of questions and we'll bring your comments up on stage as well. So there is that opportunity to interact with us. I'm Sumana Jetty. Like I said, I am the founder and CEO of a company called Jetty Wellness, and I provide evidence-based workplace wellness strategies to organizations. And we also have the Workplace Wellness Collective. If you don't know what that is, you should go check that out. This is a group of people that are really supporting wellness in the workplace through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we host events, summits, webinars, all kinds of things. So the workplacewellnesssummit.com. No, that's the old website, the workplacewellnesscollective.com. That's the new one. You can go check that one out as well. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about corporate burnout. There's a lot of conversation about it these days. We're talking about quiet quitting. We're talking about people working from home. So I was really excited when Ty messaged me on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, Sumana, let's talk about this, app that I have developed." And I said, "Of course, let's talk about it." So I'm going to bring him up in just a second here. So Ty is based out of Calgary. Hi, Ty McKenney. How are you? He's based out of Calgary. I love that his middle name is the Neuro Guy. Of course, who doesn't love that? And we're going to talk about his company a little bit, his app that he's developed, his mission. Why does he love workplace wellness so much? What drove him to create something that can, prevent burnout in the workplace? So that's the vibe of today's conversation. Very sciencey, researchy, fun, because it is a game-based app, and who doesn't want to play a game? So let's introduce Ty. Say hi and introduce yourself to us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a supreme pleasure. No, I really enjoyed our initial conversation, and I'm excited that we get to have round two of it with the public audience, really dive into some of these details of all the research.
I love that. So tell me, so you're based in Calgary, you have a company called Bit Cortex, but before we even talk about your company, tell me about what made you want to get into this space of burnout and workplace wellness?
Yeah, so that story actually goes all the way back to when I was doing my degree at the University of Alberta. After coming out of my degree, I realized I had a passion for measurement theory in psychology. I know it's super niche and nerdy. And I saw that there was within a mental health practice that a lot of the techniques and methods that they were using were outdated, to say the least, as in like using surveys and interviews. So technology from World War II. And I saw that there was a lot of opportunity to try to incorporate technology to improve that. So that's what brought me down to the University of Utah to do my PhD. I had previously seen a lot of challenges in mental health of both myself and with friends and colleagues. So this is a cause that was very close to my heart. I went down there wanting to look at brainwave technology, but along the way I discovered that actually these little computers we have in our pockets are much more useful for collecting that kind of data, and to think about how we could try to use that in order to improve our overall understanding of mental health and wellness.
Yeah, and I mean that's one of the things that I feel like we have a lot in common is that I also like the research aspect of using data and predictive analysis analytics to solve the problem of burnout. And what we've learned from, just experiencing burnout or like from people who are suffering with it right now is a lot of people say, "Well, I wish I knew about it before I was burned out. I wish there was a way to prevent it rather than now me having to deal with all the chronic diseases that happen after burnout." So one of the things I like about your company is that you are doing a lot of that prevention model. So maybe talk to us a little bit about 8-bit cortex and what it does, and a little bit about what initiated that whole thing.
Yeah. So, more or less, while I was doing my PhD, I had this idea of coming up with an app that would be able to collect data from people in little bite-sized pieces over a longer period of time. Um, but based on my research experiences, I realized that people don't actually like filling out surveys. So this is kind of where the gamification piece comes in. It's like, okay, well, if we're trying to get this data from people, we have to make it fun and engaging. And then when the pandemic hit, I was just getting close to wrapping up my PhD at that point, and I saw that there was this really exciting opportunity to take the research I was working with and try to move it into a company to get to market a little bit more quickly, and to
Mm-hmm.
really create the technology that could be beneficial for people. It took us a little while to realize that workplace wellness was the angle that we wanted to go. Initially thought that this would be a tool that would be useful for therapists and doctors to monitor their patients in between sessions. Um, but once we started talking with people, we realized that a lot of stress comes from the workplace. It's one of the primary areas that really stresses people out and causes a lot of risk for burnout. So we can intervene at that in that space. You could actually have a really big impact because not only are you reducing stress, but you also have the opportunity to tap into a wellness benefits packages and other resources provided through the companies. So not only reducing the stress, but also providing preclinical support to help people. So that way, if they do need to seek more formal healthcare approaches, they've got support leading up to that. It's not just, okay, go find a psychologist now.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge too. When I worked in corporate, and anytime I got an email that said do this survey, my immediate reaction was like, I'm not going to do the survey. I don't know what it is, but there's something about doing the whole thing and like answering the questions, especially when you're in the state of burnout, but you don't have the resources to even read an email. You're asking me to answer all of these questions. I don't want to do that. So if there's a better approach to help employees, especially now that we're all working in hybrid work environments or even just full-time remote, there has to be like a more fun way to interact with, our to get a sense of our productivity in the workplace, but also prevent that burnout piece. Now, you mentioned a little bit about people not liking surveys, and I told you why I don't like it, but what are some of the reasons why people don't like surveys? Like, what is it that is preventing them from wanting to do it?
Well, I think the reasons you described are actually very common. So, if
Okay.
people already have a fairly extensive workload, the last thing they wanted is like, oh, let me carve out another 20 minutes to answer these things that potentially are not being paid for to do, or that are just, otherwise kind of tedious, in order to, get a good, accurate scientific measurement. So really, we tried to see how can we split that difference and still get that accurate scientific assessment piece, but at the same time, can we make it a little bit more fun? And our solution was to more or less take a survey that would typically take, 20 minutes to an hour, chop it up into little bite-sized pieces, and spread that out over the course of the week. And then by doing that, we were able to also include other gamification elements to make it just a little bit more fun and engaging, so it's not as much of a time sink for people. And then because it's time series data, I get to nerd out and look at that and use that to give a much more nuanced understanding of what might actually be happening. So being able to
Mm.
use that extra contextual information that is not present if you only measure the snapshot.
Yeah, and I think that is such an important point, and I love that you have that built in. A lot of the times when we're collecting data on a survey tool, you just have the questions and like at a specific point, but you don't really know from the beginning to the end. And even just for someone who's suffering from burnout, as you go through all the different stages of burnout, as you get more emotionally exhausted, your brain fog's getting thicker, a lot of changes are happening in your body as well as an employee. And if you just tell me to do a survey, survey, I'm not going to want to do it, A, because I'm too tired, but also it's not giving the employer the information that they're looking for to take that protective preventative measure. So I'd love to know a little bit about how, so the app itself is, I looked at the app when you showed it to me a couple months ago, but the app itself, would that be on a person's computer, or is that something that the boss has to do, or do the employees get to kind of play with it on a weekly basis, daily basis? How does that work?
Yeah, so right now it's a web app, so people can access it either through the desktop or their phone, depending on what their preferences are. Um, and they would interact with it and more or less be able to log their own mental wellness data. And then as that data gets tracked, they get a personalized content within the app that helps them identify and create their own personal mental wellness strategy. So really trying to move from a one size fits all approach to a one size fits one approach. And really try to make things a little more personalized and nuanced that way. Um,
Yeah, I love that. So, you know what I also find really interesting with some of the other apps that are out there that are people are using is that you'll do this little quiz or whatever, and they'll say, I want you to do these three things or these five things. And again, going back to that state of burnout, you want to do one thing. Tell me one solution to the problem that I'm experiencing. Don't give me three options. My brain can't even process all of these different decisions that I have to make, so that decision fatigue creeps up quite significantly. So does your app give you like one solution, or is it like, hey, do all of these things, and now the staff's like, oh gosh, I have all these things I have to do?
well, that's actually a really good point that you brought up. So the answer, like any good scientist, is that it depends. So so if our app has detected that you are at high risk for burnout, we just recommend like one thing that's very simple. And there's a couple of those that'll kind of change if you re-engage with the app. But if your the burnout risk is a little bit more mild, not super severe, then we'll actually suggest more complicated things that people can do. In that case, it's just more to a prevention and mitigation strategy as opposed to like a crisis management strategy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So now you said low, medium, and severe burnout. Like, how does your app, or give me the three definitions of how your app is classifying these three versions of burnout?
Yeah, so basically, we use data that's publicly available in order to classify people based on that. If anyone is a data nerd in the science, it's a normative assessment, kind of using those statistics. And then more or less we see like how do you compare to other people in the population. And then as we continue to gather more data through our app, we're able to refine that estimate to hopefully make it even more precise and even better, make it predictive. Going back to that time series element, again, if you do a survey, you get a snapshot, you get a photograph of somebody's mental wellness. Whereas we're trying to change that photograph and make it a movie. So over the course of that week, can we get a little bit of a better picture where someone's at?
Oh, that's so cool. I love that. Again, there's so much more to data that if people start to really find these creative solutions, I think there's so much value in it. And I don't think a lot of people are doing the kind of work that you are. Now, having said that, is there a competitor in the Alberta market or the Canadian market or even the US market that's doing something similar to what you're doing?
Yeah, there's actually, I've been pleasantly surprised. There's a few actually more local competitors here in Alberta. Um, so there's one company called Whole Metrics. So they also use a survey methodology, but they augment it with some machine learning, looking behind the scenes at, I believe, internal communications, that sort of thing, to give a little bit of extra insight. There's another one called Oregon AI, where they're taking a similar approach where, again, they're using surveys, but then they have shorter follow-up surveys. And then probably the most well-known one, at least within Calgary, is Adversity, where they don't have as much on the assessment side, but then they have a much more comprehensive education strategy. So once the data is collected, giving people, very short lessons and content to help create mental resilience. So those are kind of some of the comparisons we have, at least within the Alberta space.
Yeah, and that's really cool. So when a business were to come up to you and say like my business, because I don't think businesses know. So we're talking about corporate burnout, and I don't know if businesses have a full assessment of that my team here is burned out. And we also notice pockets where maybe the entire organization is not burned out, maybe there's just pockets of like certain groups of people that are burning out. So what kind of challenges do corporations come to you to say like, hey Ty, I need 8-bit cortex to help us out with this problem? So what are some of the challenges that they're sharing with you?
I think perhaps like the biggest challenge is just the sheer complexity and like the overwhelming nature of the problem. Um, to people that don't have a background like mental health and wellness, they're like, okay, so my staff is struggling with burnout. Like, so what? Like, there's not that list of potential recommendations or things, or even a sense of how to even go about like comprehensively assessing the problem. So actually, what you just described, where identifying, there's little pockets of people within the organization. That's one of the services we provide. What I refer to as intersectionality analysis. So is it the case that there's inequalities in wellness outcomes within the organization? Because then if we've identified that maybe it's the female sales team is struggling with burnout in particular, then we can be like, okay, well, why is burnout really high for them? So we can do a little bit of a deeper dive for that group of people within there, have some conversations, dig a little deeper, and try to find what's causing that, what's been successful. Is there other pockets where things have been working, and can some of those strategies be ported over to other groups?
I love that. I think that's so important because I have noticed, also just from my own business, that not the entire organization is not burned out. There's just certain groups, certain leaders, certain pockets where there's that high burnout in that group. And then the other pockets of group, the other members are like, oh yeah, I've never really noticed, my manager's so great, I have no problems here. So identifying not just the root cause but also like those specific leadership or productivity issues or workflow optimization issues. There could be 100 different things that could be going on within that space. So I think that that's really important to know. I don't know who is watching live. If you're watching live, leave us a question or a comment. This is such an interesting conversation on using the data and evidence, and of course you making it a little bit more fun, which is my vibe. I think having joyfulness in our workplaces is super important, so we can find a way to incorporate a little game or something that gets us started in the day, but collect that data for so that our employers can then use that towards our own wellness. I think it's a win-win both for the employer and the employee. My question though for you, Ty, is do you find resistance from staff when corporations say, hey, we've got this company now, you need to log in and we are, and do this assessment on a day-to-day basis? Is there resistance from the staff to do it, or do they feel like, oh, my employer is just trying to help me, I want to do it?
No, there definitely is a skepticism and a resistance. So our response to that is more or less to treat all the data that comes into our app as protected health information. So we actually view ourselves as having a legal obligation to not share individual data with the employer, so we can be a trusted third party in that sense. Not unlike the data that might be collected from wellness benefits and insurance and providers. They know individually who's accessing what services, but they legally can't disclose that on the individual level to their clients, to the corporations. So we take a very similar approach as far as that goes. And then usually once people are aware of that policy, it kind of disarms them a little bit. Because very much so at the end of the day, we don't want the data that we're using to negatively impact anyone. If someone's at risk for burnout, the company could decide, oh, time to cut them, time to put them on the chopping block. And that's the exact opposite of what we want to happen. We will instead want to be like, okay, if someone's at risk for burnout, how can we provide support, resources, see if there's ways we can influence culture to mitigate that risk and make people feel more included, not to cut people out.
Right, because you as a third party, you have the best interest for the employer and the employee at this point. But the
Mm-hmm.
employee should feel comfortable enough. And I know a lot of people don't want to do these assessments, because they want it to be anonymous. And if it is not, but if you make it anonymous, then you're not going to know your own information. I think your name needs to be there, a couple of demographic information needs to be there. But they're also worried that if my boss finds out that I'm at a risk for burnout, they may think I don't deserve to have these projects. They may cut my pay. And just recently, I had a TikTok where we were talking about this trend, quiet quitting trend that we're noticing now, right?
Yeah.
And the comments on that video, I think it's reached over 100, 120,000 views now. And the comments on that video are quite fascinating. A lot of people are A, worried that I don't want to let them know, and B, they even if the workload is quite high, they rather just do the job and burn out than tell their boss, hey, I can't do the job, because they're afraid again that the boss is going to just, get them to like cut them, like you said, on that chopping board.
Yeah. No, no, I think this move towards like quiet quitting is actually quite interesting because I think that in more toxic cultures there is this idea, and not necessarily just toxic cultures, but this idea that you have to give yourself 100% to your role, to your job, and we know from the psychological therapy literature that boundaries are really important. Having a space, this is where my job is, this is where my personal life is, and having a little bit of division there is really important. Um, so on our end, we want to know how can we, be supportive for people in that regard. And if they have reluctance to step forward to seek help, this is where the technology that we're building can be really helpful. We don't have this in place just yet, but one of the next steps we want to develop is actually to proactively provide people with support and resources if they are flagged as being a risk for burnout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sorry to cut you off, but one question that kind of came to my mind while you were saying this is that, so the resources, and a lot of people struggle with this as well. They're looking for very localized resources, or resources that have been vetted by the company. And when I gave my presentation at the Wellness Summit, we were talking about the cost to burnout and how expensive it can be, not just for the employer but also for the employee. Now you've developed some chronic diseases. You are still dealing with all this extra, stuff that occurs in your body, and you're, having to pay for physio or whatever the, manifestations that you've had because of burnout. What resources, and do you have local Alberta-based resources or Canadian resources that you are referring to these people who may be at a low, medium, or high risk of burnout? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so right now we're trying to partner with wellness benefits providers, since they're the ones that typically would be the best hub for accessing those resources. So again, going back to, within specifically a corporate setting, someone is identified as having risk for burnout, usually that they do have resources available to them. They just might not know that they're available, or they might access them too late for it to be as impactful as it could be. So we, to the extent possible, want to be an early intervention mechanism where, we can anonymously, get people those referrals to help support them. And then where the technology that we're trying to develop is a little bit different is in the process of collecting that movie of their mental wellness. We're able to make recommendations for what specific things based on their data might be more effective. So, for example, in myself using the app, I've learned that if I go take a walk outside, I actually return back being more focused than beforehand. So now that's something that I intentionally try to work into my day. It's like if I feel like I'm not being particularly effective, then I'll just, take a quick break, go outside, look by the river. It's beautiful, kind of grounds me, helps me recalibrate. And then I return, I tend to be more focused.
And that's really important for us to know as well. Again, we talk about the solutions for burnout being so multifaceted, and it's not a one size fits all approach, just with any, mental health challenge that we're experiencing. So maybe the walk works for you. Maybe the walk doesn't work for me. I know it does. Like, I feel a lot better when I'm like just energized in some way where I'm not looking at the computer. But for other people, maybe what they need is not a walk, maybe not going to the gym. Maybe they just need to listen to music or play the piano or play a puzzle or a game, use their hands, whatever exercise or whatever solution that they need is so specific to them. So I literally hate it when employers say, hey, you're feeling burnt out, go for a walk. And I'm like, maybe the walk doesn't work for me, sir. Can you give me another solution?
No, 100%. And again, that goes back to this notion of like neurodiversity. We're all unique individual peoples. So there needs to be like a one size fits one approach. So we're really trying to develop technology to identify like what that personalized solution could be for you.
Yeah, and the data that you collect will then help the employee determine that I've done these walks for 5 days. I feel just as bad as I did on day one. Maybe walk is not a solution for me. So if they select no to that, I'm not sure how the app works. Will the app give you a different solution now to try? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. So right now, where the technology is at, it's using the data that's collected and letting people know which relationships have the strongest effects. So, for example, you can look, what's your stress level, and then you can select, what are those other social determinants of health that our app is able to measure, and see like, oh, actually, when I meditate, it doesn't really do anything. Or, oh, when I work out of an office space, actually, that reduces my stress levels for whatever reason. And all those variables are going to change from one person to another. So we really want to have an algorithm that's able to accommodate that degree of personalization.
I love that. And I love that you said it, because I was having a conversation about someone about this on Monday, where they said, "Hey, we have this hybrid approach. I'm not sure why we can't just do full-time remote. It's just so much easier. I spend 45 minutes to an hour just to get in the car to drive here, to sit here, and no one's in the office, but the anxiety of getting in the car, driving to come here, by the time I get to work, I'm already exhausted. I don't even want to be here. Had I just been at home, the 45 minutes to an hour would have helped me, like, just maybe focus on my wellness strategies a bit, or whatever that may be." So I think it's really important to that point of, is being in the office adding more stress, or working from home adding more stress? I think that data point is so essential, because everybody works so differently.
No, 100%. And this is why, again, like, I mean, I'll give the classic scientist answer: it depends. So you really have to take into account those personal factors to know whether or not a company-wide policy, like, everyone's working remote, everyone comes to the office, or where's the trade-off with a hybrid scenario. That's really gonna, those solutions and policies are gonna impact different people differently. And we want to, as much as possible, be an authority on that, so that way we can help, guide, if this is what your company looks like, these are kind of, the psychological factors and demographics present within your staff. Try this. It should work a little bit better than, a blanket one size fits all approach. Or,
Yeah.
how can people be able to select their own hybrid policy that works for them? Some people might enjoy going to the office because they're extrovert, they need that social energy, but that's not going to be everyone.
Yeah, I totally get that. Now, is there a way where, because you talked a little bit about health insurance data, and I know that data is not available. There's a few people in my network who are in that health insurance space, and they do wellness benefits. And we've talked a little bit about using, or if there is some way that that data can be used with your app to merge, to identify, like, where are people, they're not quite burnt out, they're kind of maybe in the middle, they're languishing. I know that's like a 2020 word. They're kind of languishing, but they want to be able to get the right resources for them. But maybe what they're looking for actively from the insurance claim, what we can see is they're actively going to see a psychologist. I don't know how that works, but do you see a synergy in merging the two data points together to create a more holistic picture?
Oh no, 100%. That's actually part of our longer term strategy, is to be partnering with those organizations. Basically, from the conversations I've had, wellness benefits providers and the insurance people, they really do understand that mental wellness in the workplace is a very complex issue. And their solution to that is a very complex package that includes things like health spending accounts, access to psychologists, medication coverage, but they're not necessarily sure which of those components is actually driving the outcomes, in part because it is so complex and going to change on a case by case, a company by company scenario. So where I get really excited is being able to have access to some of the data that they have, the data that we're collecting, merging the two, and then being able to help them optimize their benefits. So in that way, not only are they creating a package that should work for the companies, better than just, whatever their best guess might be, but then within that, then the individuals are also getting the specific recommendations of what resources are available that should work for them, at least based on the data that's being collected.
Yeah, and that's so important, and not just the health insurance data. The other component is also your financial wellness data. We've had people from Royal Bank of Canada, from Scotiabank, who have approached me to say, "Hey, there's also the financial stress that comes in when an employee is burned out. You're going to your health insurance benefits. You've maxed out your benefits now, and now you're using out-of-pocket expenses to pay for your therapy, to pay for physio, whatever your health concerns are." And the banks are saying, well, maybe we can help look at those data trends and see, why have your expenses like gone so high up? And that happened to me when I was burnt out, because I maxed out all the benefits that were available to me, because I was severely burnt out and I needed all of those resources. So when those benefits were burned out, the health spending dollars were burned out, or were all gone, I had to spend money out of pocket for like 18 months after. And it wasn't until I saw the data, the dashboard on RBC, that I was like, oh my goodness, I have spent so many thousands of dollars on just maintaining a health and wellness, like just getting to some kind of sustainable level for my health. I'm not even going above and beyond here. This is just 50%. So, have you thought about maybe talking to banks and other corporations to see how that financial wellness and the workplace wellness? I think there is synergy there as well.
No, there's actually a bit of a new frontier for me. So, like, I mean, I'm aware of the concept of, financial wellness. And, being a grad student, I'm very aware of how a lack of financial resources can negatively impact your mental wellness. But as far as how to tackle that, not quite sure on that one just yet. Like, I mean, one solution could be, if you do have, a very high value employee, perhaps, the caps could be raised for them because, the cost of expanding that insurance policy is probably substantially cheaper than having them need to take a leave of absence, potentially not come back to work, and then have to do the rehiring, the retraining, and all the costs that come with that. So I think there's a financial incentive that can be in place there from the company's end, but I completely agree to the extent that individual people don't have to be paying out of pocket to maintain their mental health and wellness, especially if the source of their stress is coming from their job to begin with.
Yes. Yes, and this is where I think the health insurance companies need to work really closely with work-based wellness companies and developers like yourself, is because when, say, I have a 12-month window to use all of my benefits, but I've maxed them out in 6 months, I have 6 more months of health that I need to fix, but I have no health spending dollars or any benefits available. And you can't change anything because everything is set in stone. You can't just add like another, additional whatever that may be. So that really does suck for a lot of employees. And I've heard a lot of people complain to me about, well, we maxed out our benefits. Now we're just spending money out of pocket. I have to go to work. I can't not go to work. I cannot go on a leave of absence. And now I'm suffering. My productivity has gone low. But guess what? My body is physically in the workplace because I'm getting a paycheck and I need to be here, even though I'm not performing at the level that I once used to. It's so bad.
Yeah. Well, no. So, looking what you're describing there is what we recall from like a systems management perspective, like a negative spiral or a positive feedback loop, where one thing causes another bad thing, and just kind of keeps accumulating. And what we know from the scientific literature is that those kinds of systems are fundamentally unsustainable. So something's got to give. It's just a matter of what's going to give and at what point. And to the extent that we can help either interrupt that cycle, that could be hopefully something that actually brings the autonomy back to the individual.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That loss spiral that happens fairly quickly. And I know that happened to me fairly quickly. The benefits were gone. I'm spending money out of pocket, and you're just constantly having to fix things. And you're not really focused on the job. You're just focused on how do I fix this next problem that is now that I'm having to face. So that's really challenging for a lot of people. And especially for people who don't even have, and we were pretty lucky in healthcare, pretty good benefits, like probably, a lot more than most people get. But even despite that, if you've maxed out your benefits and you have no money left to support your wellness and there's no resources available, the workplace literally has like an old checklist with a phone number, and the wait time to get on the phone is like 45 minutes. I'm like, I don't want to do this.
Yeah. No, well, that's the other thing. It's this is, I guess, like going a slight separate tangent is where I have a lot of optimism for digital health as kind of an emerging sector for being able to complement a lot of existing health resources. Um, yeah, no, I think the wait times for like psychologists in Calgary are, several weeks, up towards like 7 weeks. And, if you have an acute mental health crisis, waiting 7 weeks before you can, get access to treatment, like that's simply not going to work. So I think there's a really key role within the emerging health technology sector to, to be a bit of a bridge there. An app is not going to fix your mental health problems, but it's a scalable solution that's available to everyone. So that could help bridge them and give them support necessary until they are able to see a real human to make that extra degree of impact.
Yeah, I agree. So I also have one more question just about the way that, people might process. And this is something that I experienced. And again, just having met other people who have been through burnout, say they're doing an assessment, a risk assessment, either through an app or through a survey, whatever that may be. And they've reached a point of the survey and there's a solution provided to them. Hey, Samana, you need to do this. And then the next question could be, I think you need to get psychology support. Click this option to see whatever. Now, if I don't get the solution within 2 or 3 clicks, and if I don't already have an appointment booked through this process, I'm losing interest now. If I have to click and read another document, do some more of my own research, it's really hard for burned out employees to do that extra work. We don't have the energy to do it. It would be wonderful if the solution's there, and then the next step would be, we really think that you should be connecting with a psychologist. Click a button here. In 15 minutes, you will get a text message or an email facilitating that. Give me that solution so I don't have another task. I know this seems like maybe a lot to ask, but also it's not a lot to ask. How hard is it for the app to connect you with the right resource and to send you a text message to say your appointment is going to be for next Wednesday or something like that? So is that something that you're thinking about doing? Is that reasonable to experience? Because otherwise I've lost interest now and I don't want the solution anymore.
Do you by chance have a background in UX development? Because like that, because like that flow is like really what we want and what I would consider like gold standard. Yeah, if you take someone is struggling actively with depression, we know that they have a lot of anhedonia and lack of motivation. So ironically, their condition is going to limit their ability to expend extra effort in order to seek out those resources. So this is where like I've actually learned a lot from like being in the tech industry. Having a good UX where like it's a very seamless flow really can make all the difference. So that's something. Yeah, so we're trying to actually improve our UX to make that seamless. And the picture you just described is where I would like us to go once we have different benefits providers and other digital resources connected to our app. Really, at the end of the day, we want to be a platform where we're just helping you monitor your mental wellness, but then there's going to be other experts and other solutions that we can then recommend based on your data to actually go that extra step of doing the treatment, the intervention.
Yeah, and I don't have an experience in that. This is just me personally knowing when my energy levels are depleted, and I'm doing clicks. At my fifth click, if I don't have a solution, I'm not doing anything you told me to do. This is a lost cause. I am now out of this whole experience. I hate it, and I might not go back to the app to use it in the first place. So that's so important. And even just I was just talking to someone else about it as well, about just finding the information. If you go to the Alberta Health or government, any government website, whether it's national or provincial, finding information can be so complex. There's all of this information. Now the user has to go find this information and maybe pick a solution that works for them. Burned out employees, we're not going to do that. You give us a solution, text me that answer. And I think a lot of millennials that I know we're attached to our devices, we want that ease in that solution when our resources are depleted and we just can't work the way that we once did. Maybe if my energy was at 80%, I'm happy to take that second step. But if I'm at 40%, I can't. You've lost me as a customer. You've lost me as an employee that wants to even make a change.
No, 100%. And this is where behavior modification and habit building is so critical. So more or less, you wanted so someone's ability to implement those actions like you're describing is a function of both their own capacity as well as the environment and the systems that they're operating within. And I think that there's been particularly while mental health is being stigmatized, there's been the idea that this is something the individual needs to do. It's their responsibility. They need to hold accountability for their mental wellness. But on the flip side, we know that all the things in the environment they're working within, so, the systems and supports that are in place in the workplace, whether or not there's a lineup for Alberta Health Services to, get access to those treatments, those all play a really big role as well. And if you want to see people actually doing behavior change that's adaptive and helpful, it needs to be as easy as possible. So wherever you can, try to reduce some of that friction. That's honestly going to be the best case scenario. The challenge now for us is to build the technology in such a way that it is that frictionless. And when you said, like, how hard is it? It's a little hard, just from the technology development side. Like, it takes a while to get those things set up. But the hope is that, if we do that hard work, it can make it easier so then other people don't have to go through that hard work themselves.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So let's talk a little bit about your study. I think our audience is very quiet today, which is totally okay. Sometimes y'all are just shy and you don't want to message. You can always connect with Ty on LinkedIn, send him a DM. The website's up. I think Matt can put the website up as well. 8bitcortex.com, I believe that's the website. There it is. You can also connect there and learn a little bit about the app and what's there. Why don't you, Ty, tell us a little bit about that research study and how people can get to experience the app?
Yeah. So over a lot of our conversations with potential customers in the last several months, hybrid work has kind of been this elephant in the room where everyone's doing it to some capacity, but no one really knows how to do it. So we want to try to collect some data to be a little bit more of an authority figure on how to go about doing hybrid work. And again, as we were talking about earlier, it's really going to depend on a lot of different factors. So this study that we're conducting is sponsored by Alberta Innovates as part of a grant that we received. And it's all about trying to collect that data so that way we can offer a bit of a nuance in how to make those recommendations. And this actually touches into the broader issue of neurodiversity. So just to make this like super cut and dry and simple, take the personality trait of introversion and extroversion. A lot of people probably have an intuitive sense of like what that means, so I don't have to go into as much detail for that. But if you're an introverted person, working from home is probably going to be what's going to give you the most happiness, contentment, and kind of support you for being able to do your job best. If you're more on the extroverted side, working from home can be quite tedious. You're going to feel unmotivated, unstimulated. And in this case, going to an office might actually be more beneficial for you because then you get the accountability of your coworkers, you get that social stimulation, and that can help connect you up accordingly. So what we're doing with this study is trying to document whether or not people are working from home, whether or not they're working from the office, how that changes on a day-by-day basis, and then also collect some data about what those moderating factors might be, and really taking a lens of neurodiversity to it. So if people would like to participate, we'll put the link up in the chat there. So it's a 7-day experience where you would sign up. You would add in that hybrid work code once you create an account on our app. And that will trigger 7 days of emails where it'll prompt you to go into our app, do our check-in process, which takes 10 minutes or less per day. And then on our app, you'll get, again, some personalized content to help you understand what your own personal wellness strategy can be. And then the data that we're able to collect will allow us to compile a report to help, give other companies guidance on how to approach a hybrid work.
I love that. So yeah, there's a link. I just put that in the comment. It's also up on the screen here. If you just want to type that up and sign up, you can. I think it's really important to try to get yourself in these kinds of studies. I mean, again, I'm a scientist, so I enjoy doing these types of things. But if you are looking for a solution and you're a little bit confused about your hybrid model, this is a really interesting place to go and try it out and get those emails and see if you would enjoy the app. I'm sure there's an option to even give some feedback to Ty later on. I'm sure I'm going to be doing it. I am in the middle of moving from Edmonton to Calgary, but when I do, I'm going to sign up as well and try that. While you were talking about the hybrid work environment and the office environment and that neurodiversity piece, I just want to ask you one more question while we wrap things up here. How important, I know, and I know this is important in workplaces. We are trying to make workplaces more inclusive and diverse, but I sometimes don't see it, and it's a bit of a challenge when it's not there. How is neurodiversity being implemented in your study? I know you talked a little bit about it, but what's the angle? Like, are you trying to be more specific to specific individuals who may be experiencing, again, workplace wellness through a different lens? Like, what is your take on that?
Yeah, so basically, when it comes to the neurodiversity piece, that's kind of acknowledging that, again, like everyone's going to be a little different in some capacity or another. And it's just a matter of how different is someone, and is that difference large enough that they require some sort of accommodation of the workplace in order to function at their peak capacity. So to make that really, really explicit, let's use ADHD as an example. So people with ADHD have a number of advantages that they can bring, but they also have some disadvantages. And again, evolutionary psychology, neurodiversity, it's all about those trade-offs. You can't be good at everything, so you have to specialize at certain things. So people with ADHD are really good at working in stress-adapted environments. So, they can tolerate stress a bit more than the typical person in a lot of circumstances. They also tend to be very tolerant of risk. So that's not necessarily adaptive in every environment, but in some situations like entrepreneurship and innovation, that actually can be really beneficial. But then that also comes with a few trade-offs as well. And they're also really good at shuffling between different kinds of tasks. So they're good at going from task A to task B to task C in a very rapid kind of fashion. So those are things that can be really beneficial in certain situations. But then the trade-off is that people with ADHD objectively aren't as good at time management. There's scientific studies that have demonstrated this. So when thinking about from a neurodiversity lens, if you want people to really thrive in their environments, you want to find roles that work good for their strengths and find ways to supplement their weaknesses. So for someone with ADHD, say they're on a sales team, they're going to be very extroverted. They're going to go out there, get those calls, try to push their numbers, so on and so forth. But they might not be the most organized in their attempt to do so. So having a little bit of administrative support, more regular check-ins when it comes to things like time management can actually be very beneficial to help focus their energy, keep them on task. So now you're unlocking this employee's full potential and you're minimizing the downsides that they potentially could have if they don't have those supports in place. So that's really at the core of a neurodiversity. And if you can just start cycling through almost any mental health condition, and you can start seeing those different kinds of dynamics play out.
That is incredible. And we talk about this all the time. Work at your employee's strength. And if that strengths or all those strengths are depleting because of burnout, let's bring that back up. Maybe this person isn't as great in coding and data analysis, but they're really, really great at presentations, that customer service experience, getting on a phone call. They don't get nervous, picking up a phone to call people. Use them in the areas. Honestly, every organization needs to have like a customized approach when and this goes back, this is a little bit of a tangent, but when you recruit people for a job, you have like 20 things listed in the job description. This person's not going to be able to do all those 20 things. Maybe they're good at like 5 things, and the other could be they're medium at it, and the other two they are really bad at it. Work towards those 5 things that they're really good at, and customize that approach. I love that. I think that's so important, but I'm not sure if we are in the work space yet where we feel comfortable. I know a lot of millennials do, but I still think there's a lot of hesitation and a little bit of stigma when it comes to I want to be identified as a neurodiverse individual. I don't think people are doing that. Some people are, but most people are not. I don't know what you're seeing in your data.
Yeah, so you've actually hit the nail on the head there. Like, those conversations are in many cases are not quite happening yet. And this is why I think that the lens of diversity and inclusion is so important, because we've already now over the last several years, started to be trained in thinking about okay, you have a different ethnicity, a different gender, these more surface level demographics, and what are ways in which we could potentially, customize things to be a little more inclusive for those people. If you have a large staff that has a lot of women, a hybrid work environment can be really supportive, because then they can better manage their domestic duties with their work responsibilities. And that way it's not a trade-off so much. So now that we're starting to think about those for a lot of, I would say that those more demographic factors, the next level is to start thinking about in terms of more psychological factors and potential mental health conditions. And this is where cultivating a space of psychological safety is really important. So that way people feel comfortable having those conversations where they can be a little more vulnerable. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be a little uncomfortable. But if you're able to get through those uncomfortable conversations, you can have a potential lot of really good things coming out of it, where now your employer, your manager knows okay, you're good at A, B, and C, not so good at D. So let's give you a little bit of extra support around D and find ways to really propel you in A, B, and C.
Yes, yes, 100%. I think that is so important. And we really need to start changing the way that we work and using our employees' strengths. And that obviously it's a win-win for the organization, because now we're working towards what they're really good at and having those, kind of icky conversations. I don't want to maybe check in with you and ask you how you're doing, but I'm not your therapist. I might help you with resources and share that experience with you, but I don't have to guide you and mentor you if I don't want to. I think that distinction from a leader's perspective is really important. There's a lot of introverted leaders, extroverted leaders, people in the middle, and I've seen from introverted leaders they don't want to have these mental health conversations. They don't want to be put in a place where I need to sit and talk to your employee and say, how are you doing? Which can be really disheartening for the employee, because that's probably all they want is for their manager to ask them, like, how was your day today? Like, nothing too crazy. I'm not asking you to give me an assessment of your mental health, but just tell me how things are going. And for maybe those introverted managers and leaders, they may just need like a protocol. Like, here are the steps that you can take to have this really uncomfortable conversation, and being inclusive of those cultures. I mean, in my culture, even now, a lot of mental health conversations are not really happening. If I tell people about it, there's a few that get it, but people don't get it. They just want to keep it quiet. But as we get older and start to identify the solutions that are important to us, like, I go to a therapist, I find solutions that I need. But there's people in, communities that I know that are like, nope, I don't want to accept that I need mental health solutions presented to me. I don't have a problem. So that's a shift in community that needs to happen, I suppose.
Yeah, and I guess this is where we'll say, like, the work that Bit Cortex is doing, I really do believe in it, but we can't do it alone. So, we need to be very collaborative and, working with professionals like yourself, other D&I consultants, in order to start changing the culture so those conversations can start happening. And maybe it's not always with the leader at the top. Maybe, there's a specific person in the organization that's, a little bit more dedicated to having those conversations and, then conveying that information accordingly. But the important thing is that we can start iteratively moving towards that those conversations aren't so big of a deal. Whereas right now they are a really big deal. And, little by little, especially over COVID, I think we've made a lot of progress in that regard. It's just a matter of maintaining that momentum and to the extent possible, expanding it, making diversity and inclusion something that works for everyone.
Yes, 100%. And I think if resources have to go in to support, like you said, maybe not to the CEO level, sure, they need to be involved, but not as much. It's the middle managers. I think the middle managers need a lot of training and support, especially if it doesn't come natural to them. This ability of being empathetic, being compassionate, having these conversations about, hey, did you do your, check in on the app today? It's not a big deal to ask that question. But I think middle managers, if there was data that I could collect on middle managers, I would love to do that, just to see how there is variations in the different personality types of middle managers. The ones who are just becoming managers, you've probably been managers for 5 or 6 years, or you're moving to like executive level roles and you really don't care about this original position. But whatever that may be, I think middle managers need a lot of support in this space. Just throwing that out there.
Oh no, 100%. No, I've had one or two conversations over the last little while where it's become apparent that a lot of people in middle management, they didn't want to be a manager. They weren't trained to be a manager. They got an entry level job, were good at their job, promoted into management, and now they have to manage people. And they need support as well to understand and learn how to do that the most effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. So this, I think, concludes our session. Our audience was very quiet this morning. Maybe this is the timing of it all. It is 11 a.m., almost close to noon here in Alberta. This replay will be available for you on YouTube as well, so you can watch it and learn. I think there's so many important nuggets of information here. The research study link is in the comment. It was also displayed on the banner a little while ago, but I think the comment section you can click. For whatever reason, I think my comments are going to YouTube and not to LinkedIn, but that's okay. Any last words, Ty? What I've loved having you on Wellness Talks.
Yeah, no, if I could leave one final remark, I think would be for everyone is just listen a little bit more. Once you take a moment to pause and, really hear what someone else is saying and actively listen to the extent possible, that's what is the seed of creating that environment of psychological safety. And it doesn't matter whether you're a frontline worker, whether you're a middle manager or somewhere up at the top or an external person, being able to just, take a step back, not immediately think of your own needs and priorities and just listen to what other people are projecting and wanting to send. I think that creates a foundation that lets a lot of the work that we've been talking about start to get traction. So that's the one challenge I'll ask for everyone to do in their next day-to-day lives.
I love that. And who do you want connecting with you? What kind of people do you want DMing you to be like, hey Ty, we saw you on Samana's show. And we'd love to like help support you. I need some help or resources. Who's your ideal client?
So right now we're really looking for a few different ideal clients. One is people that do work in like large organizations at the middle management level, where they would like a little of additional analytics and support to know how they can support D&I initiatives within their company. And again, like we're specifically well positioned to help out with a neurodiversity. If there's any benefits providers or insurance people that are listening in, again, we mentioned we would love to partner with you, find out how we can help you get your services and packages to people sooner, earlier, and in a more personalized manner. And if there's any other diversity and inclusion professionals and HR professionals listening in, would love to connect with you again to see how can we make your practice more data driven.
Yes, there you go. I already know 3 to 5 different people that I'm going to tag once this live is done. Healthcare, insurance benefits providers that I think are great for you and great for them. There's got some really great people in my community who you can connect with, and tons of DEI people in my community that I think would be great. So I'm going to try to get that connection in. The networker that I am, I think this would be a wonderful opportunity for both parties to like get to know Ty and for Ty to get to know you guys. So I'm going to do that right after the live is done. So Ty, thank you so much for your time. I've loved having you. It was a bit of a quieter audience today. Totally okay. We're coming towards the end of the month. August, back to school anxiety is starting and all that stuff's happening. So I know everyone's really, really busy, but you do have an opportunity to watch the replay. I'll be back again next month with another cool person. I'm not going to tell you who it is now. I'm just trying to finalize the details of that. But the person is in Calgary. All these wonderful people in Calgary. Maybe that's why I'm moving to Calgary as well. But my next live is going to be in Calgary, so the background's going to be a little bit different, or maybe the same. I don't know. I'll try to put this. This painting's been in almost every single live I've done. Maybe I'll just keep that one up. But next live from Calgary, new person in the workplace wellness space, evidence-based researcher, physician, a wonderful human being. So I can't wait to bring that person up next week. If you are going to watch live or watch the replay, leave us a comment. Ty will answer some questions as well, and tag him and DM him and connect with him, and have yourself a wonderful day. Bye. Bye, Ty.
Thank